Good evening, everyone. Hello, welcome to Museum of the African Diaspora. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Curator of Public Engagement here at the museum. And I'm so excited to be presenting this program tonight with our Chef-in-Residence Jocelyn Jackson. This is one of my favorite program series that I get to work with, and we always have incredible people with amazing food and beautiful cookbooks, and tonight is no exception. With the Contemporary African Kitchen, we have the author and contributors, and we're going to have amazing food afterwards that's inspired by the book and the recipes in the book. So everyone here is in for a real treat, and I'm excited that you're here to share it with me. I want to introduce everyone who's going to be here tonight. Oh, actually, two orders of business. I almost forgot. One is you have a couple of items on your chairs. One is a QR code that leads you to a program survey, and we would love for you to take a few minutes to fill that out at the end of the program. It's super helpful for us in knowing who our audience is, what you got out of the program, what you'd like to see here at MoAD. So if you can do that, I would appreciate it. If anyone doesn't know how to pull a survey up with a QR code, I'm totally willing to help. And then also there's a postcard made by Jocelyn, our chef-in-residence, and she'll be talking about that later as well. And I definitely would be remiss if I did not thank our lead sponsor, Kaiser Permanente, for supporting the Chef-in-Residence program here at MoAD, which started in 2015. And they've been our lead sponsor for all these years, supporting the incredible work that we've been able to do around food justice, social movements around food, and Black chefs, highlighting Black chefs. So thank you, Kaiser Permanente. And now on the stage behind me, we have Alexander Smalls. He's a James Beard Award-winning chef, author, and restaurateur. He was co-owner of the Harlem restaurants The Cecil and Minton's, and the founder of the African food hall Alki Bulan in Dubai, which showcases the food and culture of Africa. He's also a world-renowned opera singer. Maybe we'll get to hear a little. And the winner of both a Grammy and a Tony Award. Incredible. I don't think we've ever had a chef on stage that was a winner of a Grammy and Tony Award. That's very perfect. His previous publications include Meals, Music, and Muses, Between Harlem and Heaven, and Grace the Table, and he lives in New York City. Nina Oduro is an entrepreneur, writer, and inclusion strategist. As co-founder and CEO of Dine Diaspora, she connects people and brands to African diaspora food culture. Her accolades include recognition as a 2020 changemaker in Washington, D.C.'s food system by Washington City Paper, and an honoree in the Future of Ghana's 30 Under 30. She lives in Washington, D.C., so we're thankful for them traveling all this way to be here with us tonight. We also have Pierre Thiam. He is a celebrated chef, restaurateur, award-winning cookbook author, and entrepreneur. Born and raised in Senegal, he is known for his innovative cooking style, at once modern and eclectic, yet rooted in the rich culinary traditions of West Africa. His critically acclaimed New York restaurants Teranga, located in Harlem and in Midtown Manhattan, introduce healthy, fast casual fare directly sourced from farmers in West Africa. He's the founder of Yolele, which distributes African food products across the USA, introducing such ingredients like fonio, a resilient and nutritious ancient grain from the Sahel region of West Africa. And our incredible chef-in-residence here at MoAD, Jocelyn Jackson, is an award-winning chef, artist, teacher, and activist who was raised on the Kansas plains by Tuskegee Airmen and the first Black woman to run for mayor in Wichita. Jocelyn has been a professional cook for over 12 years. She spoke on the principles of community nourishment at Court Bouillon in southern France, and was part of the team that presented the inaugural diaspora dinner at MoAD in 2015. She is the founder of Justice Kitchen and the co-founder of People's Kitchen Collective. Both organizations serve to center the lived experience and liberation of Black and brown peoples using food, art, and social justice as vehicles for change. Please join me in welcoming this incredible group of people.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for those introductions and orienting us to this space. Welcome, everyone, to this moment in time that we get to share with these extraordinary folks that are bent on this movement of food. And I think that's one of the major velocities within this book is that we are getting the opportunity to really understand that this acknowledgement of the full canon of the African continent when it comes to food is the necessary experience that we need in order to reclaim the movement that is possible when we acknowledge and interact with and enjoy and uplift the foodways comprehensively from the continent. And I would love to start from that place and really get each of your input on the beauty of this book and what it contains. I'd like to start with you, Alexander, and many people you'll read in the foreword that you have placed in this book, some of the thoughts that I'll be trying to tease out here. But for me, when I got the opportunity to first see this book, thank goodness for e-galleys, and having access to it for the first time, what really brought me to the place of the real gravity of this work is that you all took the time to meet and to reveal every side of the continent. Why did you do that? Why did you make that the basis, the foundation for this particular collection?
Hello.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
We're going to do a mic moment.
Is it on?
We'll get
Is
it
it
on.
on?
Oh, we're going to do it.
Is it on?
Thank you.
Well, first I'd like to say good evening to everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. I know you've had quite a day here in San Francisco with earthquakes and tsunamis trying to invite themselves. But nonetheless, we survived it all, and we are here, and it's nice to see you. I think the best place to start with my engagement with this book is essentially I was looking for me. I was looking for me across the Atlantic. I knew that my beginning was not here in America, and I knew that because I come from a long line of Gullah, Geechee people in South Carolina. My father was born in Charleston, Johns Island, and if you had heard my grandfather put words together in a sentence, you would have thought he was West African. So I understood that there was more to my story than what was available, and I sought to find myself through the lens of my own culinary journey. I set out to connect the dots between what was in my parents, grandparents, ancestors' pots, and how that got there through the footprint of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, at this point, I'd already opened 3 critically acclaimed restaurants in New York City, specializing in what I now, initially, what I called Southern Revival cooking, based on low country cooking. But then with my last restaurant, the Cecil, that I opened in Harlem in 2013, that restaurant came about after taking a journey throughout the sort of following the slave trades throughout the transatlantic and also South America, Asia, Africa, essentially understanding how through slavery Africa changed the global culinary conversation. And this is where I was able to begin to put my own DNA through the conversation of food together. And this adventure, and I'm skipping around a little bit, but I want to give you the fullness of my personal moment. This resulted, after opening the Cecil, which was the first Afro-Asian American brasserie that essentially was the mirrored reflection of that 10-year journey throughout 5 continents. That restaurant won Best New Restaurant in America, Esquire magazine, and it was the first time a black restaurant had won that honor in 50 years of it being that. But that was the progression piece that initially brought me into Africa full circle. I was invited to open the first African dining hall in Dubai for Expo 2020, and it was called Al Kibulan, which was the original name, first name of Africa, written Arab name. And 22,000 square feet, 12 different concepts. And I had created every recipe, every concept myself. I mean, because I had studied African food and foodways. Yep. And then I had an aha moment that the arrogance of me telling Africans what their food is. And so I recognized that I needed a tribe. Pierre is one of my tribesmen. Nina is one of my tribesmen. But I could not have the audacity to create something without the voice of Africans and African chefs. So I became the curator of my African dining hall. I created 3 of the concepts, and the other 9, I brought in African chefs, sort of north, south, east, and west, central, which then gave me the concept of this book. Because this book is also built this way, north, south, east, west, central, because Africa's huge. You know, and if you do nothing else, and I'm sure all of you are enlightened here, you have to leave here knowing that Africa is a continent, not a country. Right. And it is about 54 countries. So basically, this is how this book came together, because the dining hall gave me the formula. And then when I got the contract with Faden Press, and I wanted an international publisher, because the book is also in French, by the way. Right. And it was released last month at the same time all over the world, which is really quite extraordinary. So the next call I made was to Nina Oduro, sitting on the stage here, and we had met because of the work she does in the dining, cooking space, supporting chefs, and also supporting really the discipline, the creative arts of our culinary in the DC area. We had done some projects together. When I opened Al Kibulan in Dubai, she came with her camera and crew and made a documentary. And so I called her up and I said, we have the project of a lifetime. Are you ready? And I've set you up for Nina now to tell you where she was when she got that call, and how we commenced.
Yeah, so I pick up Alexander's phone call about, hours away, and I was in Bangladesh. I was actually completing a research project from work that I had been doing for an organization I was consulting for. And just all the way over there, Alexander calls, and I was ready to drop this project anyway. I'm like, I'm done. And he calls at the perfect time, and like he said, we'd already been on this journey in separate paths, but always intertwined. Same thing with Pierre. Yeah. And so coming to this project, I knew that we had all the tools already. He had the idea, he got this started, but together we would be a force in bringing this to life and shaping it to be able to speak to what Africa brings to the table in food today. And so that began our journey, and then we start calling up our chefs, calling up folks to get it started.
Creating our tribe. And one of those people was Pierre Thiam, was a celebrated chef. We met years and years ago in New York. We were both doing the same thing, which was advocating and promoting the value, the brilliance, the complexity, the beauty of African food. And I say African majoritatively because if you look like me, you're African. It's not about Caribbean, it's not about African American and all the other labels, that we are African people. and the food. And if you don't believe it, just go to dinner with everybody. You'll be eating basically the same thing, you know. And when I said to you I needed a village, Pierre was one of the people I called. And he came to Dubai, and he did a master class, installed a concept. He helped expand the narrative of his Senegalese food. I want you to jump in here, Pierre, after you get yourself some water. Jump in here and say something.
So tough to. Okay, there we go. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience, and it's not easy to follow his act, but I'll try. So for me, it was an organic journey as well, similarly to you. I was a young cook in New York City in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was quite exciting to be in that place. It was the food capital of the world already, but there was a problem for me being from Senegal and West Africa. Africa was absent of that world, really. It was a world that thought cuisine was something different than the flavors that I experienced. And I thought that was an opportunity because I knew, with all due respect to these other cuisines, French, Italian, I also knew that the cuisines that I enjoyed eating in Senegal, the street food of Dakar, which is like a pastiche of West African, Nigerian, Ghana, and Togo, all those wonderful flavors, would be appreciated in New York City. And that's really when I decided, as I'm growing as a chef in this career, in this industry, I want to be someone who finds inspiration in that food culture, in my tradition, rather than being a chef who just mimics a cuisine, a French cuisine or other cuisine. That did make sense. I was similarly to you, I was searching for myself, searching for my culture as I'm going through this journey, and that's eventually how I started from working in those restaurants to starting my own catering, and then my very first restaurant, early 2000, in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, when Bed-Stuy was still Bed-Stuy. I think we gentrified it, unfortunately, but then eventually, second restaurant also in Brooklyn, at Teranga, and then went even all the way to Lagos to open a restaurant in Victoria Island. And all along the way, just learning to know more about these cuisines, going from the cuisine at home first, my mom, my grandma, that food that really was what was inspiring me, that got me to write my very first cookbook. And then that cookbook was surprisingly well received, as at the time finding a publisher was impossible. To publish something on West African food, it's like no one wants to read about that. But eventually I found this wonderful publisher that actually went on to publish 3 others of my books, and that book asked for a sequel, and I wanted that sequel to be really the continuation of the story. Where is that food coming from? And that's really when I'm writing the book and I'm going through those recipes, I'm realizing that connection between that food of West Africa and the food that I go to when I'm craving that food in New York City and I can't find it. I go to Harlem and I go to find Southern food, or I find a Caribbean restaurant. I can connect to that cuisine. And that's how the middle passage of chapter of that book came to be. It's just really, it was a no-brainer. I had to write about that chapter. I had to write about black eyed peas and the way we cook it in Senegal and how it becomes Hoppin' Jones in North Carolina, in our country, or how it becomes acarajé in Brazil and we call it akara, and there were so many of those recipes that was jumping out for that chapter, and then, it was like so amazing that the story was not being told, and realizing that every single one of those recipes were actually the story. Those recipes, those ingredients, their journey were telling me a story, the story of like the creativity, the deliciousness of a cuisine, and the cuisine that is so resilient, that went through 400 years of atrocities, and reinvented itself in so many ways all across. Wherever our people went, you would see like forms of that West African flavor coming here and there in like places in Ecuador. I mean, I go to Esmeralda and I see it popping in Mexico, and they don't even talk about it in Veracruz.
In India.
In India, well, there we go. I mean, but even the Atlantic, right? The Atlantic's like is so. It was like, wow, this is more than just food. This is really culture, and this is history, and
Well, it's our legacy.
it's our legacy.
And it's also our conversation. The thing about black food,
Yep.
it's currency for us.
Yep.
When we didn't own ourselves, we owned that recipe, we owned that dish. It was a source of pride, dignity. It was how we took care of each other. I couldn't buy you a ring, but I can make you a pie. I can make you that favorite okra dish you love. It was essentially what we owned.
That is so true. I'm so grateful that you brought that up in specifically that way, because so much of the story of African foodways is trying to label it as, for example, poverty food. Trying to label it in these ways that de-emphasize the fact that it is the source of all foodways. And so I want to come back to you, Nina, because I'm sorry, I got equanimity of voice thing that I need to go on. So I need to come back to you and get more of your story. Because one of the things that you were drawn to do is to create something called Dine Diaspora, which I encourage all of you to look into. You, in many ways, what I just spoke to is what Dine Diaspora is also tending to. Can you speak more about your origin story and how it fed into this project?
Absolutely, thank you for that. So I started with my co-founder, Dine Diaspora, 10 years ago. So we celebrated 10 years this year. So excited about that. Along the way is how I got connected to both Alexander and Pierre. We had one of our first dinners was with Pierre, and we were so excited because, I mean, just the wealth of work that these men have done, it meant so much to provide a platform that we created ourselves. And the impetus of it was to, one, connect people.
Yes.
That was our first impetus. Use food as a pathway for connection between people and allow that connection to manifest into broader things. We chose African diaspora food because we felt like that and knew for ourselves that that was the missing piece of the American culinary culture that just hadn't gotten its chance. Though we knew from our homes, I'm Ghanaian, I was raised in a Ghanaian home here in the States, and my co-founder is as well. We knew that our foods were rich, that they're beautiful, that they many times have the quality and the sort of richness as any other cuisine. But we didn't care to educate others, we cared to celebrate it ourselves. So using that, we invited chefs to do dinners with us in the early days, and evolved into eventually listen to them and what they needed. So along the way, we began to create programs that support just the chefs, and today they still exist. One of which is actually supporting Black women in the food industry, whether they're chefs or journalists or influencers, whatever that may be. But the idea that if we are going to celebrate, we have to also support and identify their needs so that we have sustainability. And I think that's what is always missing when we begin to focus on just celebration, that we must invest in ownership, as we've been talking about, and in avenues that enable us as a culture to have true freedom to create and to grow and to make what we believe is beautiful and powerful, but to also to go the long term. What does that look like? So Dine Diaspora exists 10 years in the making, and along that way is where I was able to partner with Alexander on a few projects, from events to the documentary we just talked about, that actually shows us in the kitchen. It'll be coming out in January. I've got the date now.
Oh, go ahead and
The
tell
thrь
us
of
the name
us,
of the
yeah.
date. The name of the date.
So I don't have the exact date yet. Hold on with me. But January we will release it, and it'll be free, accessible to anyone to be able to enjoy. But the idea here is that storytelling is also really important. Capturing the stories of our foodways, capturing the messages, which is obviously what the book also does, but through many avenues that people can access easily, and also feel invited into carrying it on. So this book is for home cooks.
Yes.
And the message here is that you too are a chef in your own right. I mean, maybe not to this level, but to your own level, you can do a little something with this book. And that food invites us all to be able to participate, to learn, and to also have the freedom to grow and tell stories and create your own experiences.
Yes, that's so important, and I'm so grateful that you pointed that out about this book. Y'all were on purpose when you oriented people to this book. You said this is how the book is used. There's a whole section. This is how you get into this book. At the end, there's a moment around, let's really talk about what these ingredients mean and what we talk about when we are trying to, quite frankly, recipes are suggestions, right? Like we try to get something in a cookbook that's replicable. That's important in order for it to be consistent in a home. But also it is, what are our expectations when we're entering into these recipes? And you do such a good job of making sure people are invited into this book. And the piece that I really enjoy is something that you just referenced. This book is meant for hosting. This book is meant for you all to say, I can pair this dish with that dish. I can see how the flavors from this country are reflected over here in a different way. Like, you really invite people into the process of hosting and cooking in a way that feels accessible. And I feel like that's such a great introduction for folks to understand. It's not at arm's length. It's not unattainable.
No.
It's accessible.
Well, you know, the interesting point there, because this also is how we decided to put the book together. The criteria, once we decided that we needed a village, we needed chefs from Africa to profile their story. And as you can see, as the book is created, chefs come from the regions of Africa. And the regions are more important than the countries.
Yep.
We asked that they create recipes as if I was coming to dinner. What would you serve me? That was what was one of the criteria. The second was the dishes had to be for the home cook, because this book not only highlights and showcases each chef, but it is meant to expand the narrative of African food, educate people about African food, and create food that anyone could make at home, delicious food. The idea is that I want, you know, housewives in Arizona, in Oklahoma, Kansas. I want people in the suburb of the cities having Africa parties, making these food. The idea that African food has not been elevated in the conversation of culinary around the world, when it is the foundation of cooking and food, well, it's just racism. It's just prejudice, racism, and all the things that go with that. And I can say that from the point of 35 years ago, I was the first fine dining African American restaurant in New York City, and I opened it in the most expensive neighborhood in New York City intentionally. And everybody thought I had lost my mind, and I may have, but it was something I felt passionately had to happen in order to propel our story as Black people in the culinary space and have a seat at the table. As a young opera singer, I traveled all over the world, and every possible cuisine, you know, was grand, presented, but we weren't in the story. they tried to convince me that my grandmother's brown pan gravy made from flour and beef stock or chicken stock was inferior to the French grandma's heavy cream and butter and a little flavoring. And so we have got to rescue and take our food back and celebrate it, because they even had us thinking that there was something wrong with our food. Oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. There's nothing wrong with our food. Our food is not an issue. It may be the way in which we abuse ourselves with our food, because when you come from an impoverished background, a lot of times food is everything to you, and it becomes essentially medication. You know, because some people don't know when they're going to eat again. You can't have macaroni and cheese, 3 times a day, but there's nothing wrong with having macaroni and cheese and your vegetables and your this in a balanced diet. And when we can do that with our food, we're fine. We're fine. But we needed to be in that conversation, which is what the work that Pierre and I and Nina have been doing as chefs, and also as the support of chefs, bringing our food to an elevated place in the culinary conversation, something we can all be proud of. And I want all of you to get this book and cook this food and truly be proud of it, truly feel the pride and dignity of every chef in every child.
That is it. Thank you for making sure that sermon was said.
I just want
That
to
was
add
important.
something to what you said,
Please do, Pierre.
and how they try to deny our cuisine, deny us, and that's vicious. And you're right, racism is the right word. It was by design, because recognizing a cuisine to people that you are depicting as uncivilized, it doesn't work.
No.
Civilization begins with cuisine, and you can argue that fire was first mastered in Africa, and then that's the first step to creating cuisine, getting people around your food, and that's how communities are formed. And this is really where it all began, and that's what something that they couldn't accept. Is accepting that was the problem, and that cuisine that they try to deny to us is that cuisine that's really is telling the whole story, because you can see the story through the ingredients, and you go to eat a gumbo in New Orleans, and you trace the rice arrived from West Africa, right here, the okra arrived from West Africa, and then they say, oh, it's a French, and none of those ingredients found in France, right? So that's interesting. And then you see the exact same recipe, somewhat in, we went to
But
Dakar.
Pierre, rice. You touched on rice.
One example.
But listen, the richest city in the world was Charleston, South Carolina.
Thank you.
Why was it the richest city in the world? West African rice growers were brought here to capture them. They want to tell you cotton built the South. It was rice.
They called it Carolina
Rice.
Gold, right?
Carolina Gold.
Thank you.
And has been brought back into our food systems
Right.
now
Right.
as well.
I mean, it really was cultural, culinary apartheid, And so, I mean, and these things are important for you to understand, because we have to put back the pride and dignity in a culinary expression that's been stolen.
That's it. And one of the reasons I'm always in this, I create altars for each of these events is because I need to honor that expression. The rice is there. This expression of ingredients through our ancestors. And I want you to speak to that, Nina. There is this experience that we have in this book of knowing that every single writer of a recipe took the moment of calling in ancestral knowledge, but it wasn't just the people ancestor, it was the food ancestor. And how did you elicit that? How did that come about?
So, Alexander talked a little bit about, what we asked the contributors to do. And, the impetus was create, what you would cook for a gatherings like Alexander would have in his home. And we left it at that, just to see what they would bring us. Oftentimes, being African myself, being Black and American myself, I know that we're often sort of told to do told to do things so that an audience can receive us a certain way. And we didn't want that to be the way that we led our community into any sort of project, especially calling on their own gifts. To come to you and say, do this, we want a dessert, we want this from you, it has to include this ingredient, would be regurgitating the same types of processes that we don't feel comfortable with ourselves and push away because it's not honoring our individual contributions to the work that we do. So we allowed them to bring forth what they already do well. And in that midst, we were able to draw from that to tell the story that they were giving us. And one of those things that emerged in that storytelling was, at the core, this book is called Contemporary African Kitchen. So what does that word mean? What does that signify? It is what African food is today and what our contributors are telling us, right? What these people from their own worlds are giving us. And some of it is drawing on the ancestral ingredients and giving us traditional recipes. And others of it are still digging at those, taking those ingredients, but making something different and new. And both things are okay and can exist at the same time. So there's recipes in the book where you find that you don't know. If you're from a particular country, you haven't seen it done this way. You might recognize ingredients, you might recognize, processes, but maybe you don't recognize the dish. And I invite us all to be curious. Even in some of the traditional dishes, it might be done differently because it's someone from a different culture. And as we know, here in America, being from different parts of the United States, Black people do things differently. Some people are doing this with their grits, some people are doing that with their grits, and everybody has an opinion.
Let's disagree right now.
And that is, to me, how rich our diaspora is, that we can all be in one room and we can all, even in our foods, do something slightly different, but at the core have the same ingredient. And that's what matters, right? And so I say that because you're gonna go to this book and some areas are gonna be very new if you're from a particular place. And you may not recognize it, but the curiosity about the ingredients, about the process, is all, what I think draws us in and invites us to continue learning. And there again, you might have some familiarity with stuff that you've already seen before, that you find intriguing and takes you back to some memories that you have or connects the diaspora even further for you. That's okay too. And I say that because I want everyone to know that contemporary is Africa itself. Africans and the diaspora can be here and now, drawing on our past, investing in the current and looking into the future. It's all okay. We can do that all at the same time. And a book about Africa should not have to be about ancestors and tradition. It can be about who we believe we are right now.
Yeah, and I think that is so profound. Thank you so much for that. Because there is another choice that you all made. You left it to Phaedon to do the visuals, right? Like, that's a big choice. And that's a big thing. I didn't bring them out here, but I have a collection of some of my books that are from the continent. And the aesthetic in each one, how the visual presentation means so much about the storytelling.
Well, let me just add to that.
Speak to it.
Because we did and we didn't. We were very much involved.
Oh, yes.
With,
Please, yes,
with
speak to
that.
that.
For example, the photographer of my last two books prior to this one did the photography for this
Yes.
book, and Beatrice. And she's a Brazilian photographer. Her aesthetic is just the best. And it was everything I wanted. And then we also weighed in on the cover.
Yeah.
Because, again, going back to that word, contemporary, which is intentional. And contemporary really represents the new voices of Africa, the new culinary practitioners who are reinterpreting their legacy cuisines, their heritage cuisines for the world. And so the first cover they gave us was a little stereotypical kind of thing that
Which
they
is
do for
a thing.
Africa
Yes.
or the Caribbean or anything
Yes.
that black folks are doing, right?
Can-
And so, yes, so I'm like, oh, no, it's contemporary intentionally. And then we got this brilliant cover. I mean, I am so happy with the way this book looks and the way it flows. I couldn't be more excited about it.
That's beautiful, and it's striking. It is a very intentionally created work of art, as well as cookbook, as well as history, as well as call to action. Like, it's everything that's going on in this one book, and the full color, full dye. Like, it's doing it justice, to say the least. And I really appreciate that we can turn to this text as for me, it can be an example of a turning point of how we perceive this cuisine, not just as elevated, but as original, as originator. And I'm going to do a pop quiz now, so I hope you all have done your homework. Hey! And I'm going to start over with Pierre. I really want to get into the food, and you can pick your own recipe if you'd like, but I'd love to ask each of you, when you were going through this book, when you were saying, oh my gosh, I haven't seen that before, I don't know what that is, or where is that? Tell us, each of you, what is one of your favorite recipes in the book? And if not recipe, you can tell us region or country, but I just want to give an opportunity for each of you to speak to this, you experiencing this book and what you resonated with.
Oh, thank you.
I love it.
The lifeline.
Help each other.
Did I call someone?
Exactly. The lifeline is activated.
Oh, it's a tough one, and it's a tough one just because it's ADHD brain first of all, and so many recipes are amazing in the book, and one is actually absolutely amazing is mine.
Exactly. I knew it.
There we go.
I knew it.
Let's just talk about that.
and that's a traditional dish actually, and that's an opportunity to even talk about that contemporary and the ancestors, because it's contemporary in relation to the past, right?
Yeah.
That connection is there, and that's really the reason why this even is another way of saying we are continuing telling the story. It's evolution. It's like food has this beauty of transcending borders, and you said that in a way, also beautiful way, when you say you didn't want countries, you wanted regions, because those countries, if you take them in, that becomes accepting the colonizers' borders.
Yes.
And
Yes.
exactly. And that's not what it's about, because you see that food, again, you see traces of that food from Senegal in Veracruz, right? So, and in Guinea, and it's in Nigeria in different forms because of the environment, but it's there, you can see the familiarity and you see it, so that's it.
Well, the other thing is
But
that,
what is
Africans
the
are
dish?
nomadic.
That
is the
was the
dish?
question. Long way to say that my favorite dish is this leafy vegetable. We call it sauce feuille in Senegal because of the French colonizers. We talk about French. So sauce feuille is leafy sauce, but traditionally it's done with sweet potato leaves or cassava leaves. In this dish, I think I made it with kale, just to tell you that you can also be comfortable with your cuisine and the ingredients, have that flexibility. Those recipes are guidelines, but they are not the Bible. You have to stick to it. And your African mama will tell you actually about the recipes when you ask her to tell you exactly how many ounces or teaspoons. Exactly. She doesn't cook like that, and she wants you to learn.
Until it's right.
Until it's right, exactly. You have to cook with your senses. That's conscious cooking, and taste and adjust, and every, the recipes gives you directions, but you have to be present, and cooking is really the opportunity to really, it could be a spiritual moment if you are present and you taste and you smell and you look at the visual and you see all of it, talking to the ingredients. Yeah. And realizing that you are even saying that message that comes from millennia, like those recipes were transmitted generations after generations after generations, and went through the hardships of it tells you so many stories. And so you in this kitchen, you are doing something quite amazing. But again, to get back to my dish, it's a leafy vegetables. I made it with peanut sauce. There's peanut in it. It's like a dish that you see variations of it in different regions of West Africa. But why I liked it, and America, why I liked it is just the leafy aspect, because leafy stews are a West African dish. And nothing is wasted in our cuisine. It's very nutritious. And sweet potatoes, we use the sweet potato, we use the sweet potato leaves, we use the roots. Everything is cooked and everything is nutritious. And now people are finally admitting that our cuisine is the most nutritious and the most balanced food out there, the traditional West African cuisine. That's from the Lancet reports, which are like the report of the nutritionist experts in the world. So that's really something that to keep in mind. And that's why I wanted that dish to be served. So leafy vegetables too.
Thank you so much for that. How about you, Alexander?
I've forgotten the question.
Oh, no. From
No.
this book
No.
of all
No.
the dozens
it.
of recipes.
Well, listen, when I'm asked that question, I always say I have no favorites.
Of course,
I mean,
absolutely.
Which style do you like the best? I mean, these chefs came and they brought it. But I will share this, primarily also because it mirrors the complexities as well as similarities of African food and African American food. When I did the Today Show last month, there were 2 dishes that I did on that show for this very reason. One was the chicken pilau, which many of you may be aware of pilau, perlo, pilu. We have so many different names for it, and in New Orleans it's jambalaya. But essentially, it is a rice dish with chicken, and it's cooked together. This particular dish, because of the Indian influence in East Africa, is made with marsala, which is a very aromatic spice mixture. You take the spices whole, you roast them until they become very fragrant, and then you grind them into a seasoning, a spice. And so chicken pilau. Now, my mother made something similar in South Carolina called chicken bob. I don't know if any of you ever heard that. There's a recipe for it in my cookbook, Meals, Music, and Muses, because I thought it was such an important dish. But it's just like this chicken pilau dish. The second dish I made was from Ethiopia, and it was much like our famed banana pudding. It's cookie banana pudding. It's made the same way, except the cookies are for mostly there's a special cookie, and they're smaller and they're left whole, and so you put some cookies in the bottom, like we use the vanilla wafers, do a layer of vanilla wafers, layer bananas, then the cream, well, it's similar and similar flavor, just different texture. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for painting those pictures for us. How about you, Nina?
Well, miraculously, I love anything under 20 minutes. So if you go in that book and it's under 20 minutes, that's my favorite. And there's quite a few. I've noted them all, so let's get ready, pen and paper. One, there's drinks in the book. So if you don't know, the drinks are very easy to make. Some are cocktails, some are not. But those are definitely under 20 minutes. No drink should ever be over 20, even over 5 minutes. But I love that. I think those are the easiest thing to get something out of the book that other people can enjoy, you can learn. Uses very, African ingredients, and you can get drunk a little bit, why not? The other one I want to call out is our North Africa section is really interesting. And I'm calling that out because there's one particular chef in that section called Mohammed Kamal. He is of Nubian descent. And so if you know Nubians in Egypt, they are the black Africans that are in Egypt. His recipes are very special because they draw very much on Nubian culture, which has traditionally, just not been exposed. Their stories have been suppressed. And as much as we are able to, experience couscous and other types of ingredients that have really been popular around the world, actually North African food has been popular around the world more than any other African foods. And yet Nubian food has never been part of that story. And so I can't say there's a favorite of mine, but I think it's very important for us to continue to have his story in the book, and to have a place for the Nubian people to be able to share their traditions. So he has recipes that are, some are traditional, some are more innovative expressions of what he's been able to create from his traditions. And yeah, Ethiopia is also another one that does that. Our Ethiopia section draws on tradition, but they're not traditional recipes. And as Alexander said, something easy as a banana pudding. That's on my list. So check it out.
I love that. Thank you for that. Keep that real. Thank you so much for what you were able to offer to this, even more to the depth of the storytelling of this book, by sharing some of those embodied moments with food that I think this book invites. And I really want to have an opportunity for folks here in these chairs in front of us to ask questions of you, because I've heard already that some of y'all are super fans, and it's great. Thank you for that. So know that that's happening in the audience. And also just there's a lot of curiosity around what this book really can be for everyone. So I would love to take a few questions from folks, and I did plant a few in my community, so I have a few questions on board as well. But is there anyone in the audience right now that has something that they're curious about and wanted to share? Thank you.
Thank y'all for being here. This has been really interesting to hear. One of the things that sometimes is a misnomer with African cooking is that it takes lots of different spices or very specific ingredients, and people think, well, I may not cook this way often enough to make the investment. And even here in the Bay, when you think about some of our most well-known outlets for spices, something like an Oaktown Spice Shop, and you go in and you can kind of get individual things to put something together, but there's not really, at least not yet, any true representation of some of these spices. Do you think the next frontier of this is having a lot of these ingredients readily accessible so that it becomes easier for people to find their place in this kind of cuisine?
You should take that.
I know, you really should.
He lives here.
Well, yeah, actually, there's a brand called Yolele, and yeah, that's what it is, an African food brand. And again, that opportunity, I noticed that when I was writing my very first cookbook, and realized that I had to think of substitutions for ingredients, and I was like, why do I have to think of substitutions for ingredients? Should I see this as an opportunity to not only add values to those ingredients, bring opportunities for the small farmers that grow those ingredients in the regions, and for the people who will be cooking it have the real experience. So that's when I started to think of the concept Yolele. And my first ingredient platform was fonio, which is this ancient grain that's been cultivated for thousands of years in rural Africa. But even in cities like Dakar and Lagos and Abidjan, you wouldn't find fonio products, and that didn't make sense to me, because it was the African quinoa. It's a grain that's super nutritious, that's drought resistant, that is gluten free. It was checking all the boxes. It cooks in 5 minutes. It's very versatile, and I saw that as the one that would be leading this brand that would start bringing fonio to the market. And thankfully, Whole Foods were opening next to my Harlem restaurant, and they took our product. And eventually today, a few years later, we are distributing all the Whole Foods, and we added now other fonio products to it, and we have spices. Now we have the line of spices that are not just fonio, just the spices that you need to make that cuisine. We have snacks inspired by West African cuisine, but like chips, fonio chips. We have even introduced the grain to like brewery industries. Now you have fonio beer, a whole movement, fonio for beer for impact that started. You can find Guinness, Fonio Guinness in the market now. You can find Brooklyn Brewery, thanks to my brother Garrett Oliver. Carlsberg. There's like 10 breweries out there today who launch Fonio beer, all the way one in China, So this is really something that's...
So you can get drunk while you cook.
You can get drunk while you cook, and libation is important in our cooking, But yeah, that's really what the next step. You're right. Good question.
And I think it's such a good question because it actually goes to so many social issues, not just food issues. Luckily, I was able to do a trip to several trips to West Africa, including Mali, Burkina Faso, Senegal, and in these experiences, what became true is that the embrace of the funk when it comes to food preparation, in my experience of West Africa, was beautiful. We just don't have that skill here in the same way. So it's partly familiarizing, but partly raising the veil of racism that comes with, oh, that smells bad. Oh, that's not right. Like that kind of thing. There's such deep education and repair that has to happen for people to embrace many of the best ingredients in the world.
Yeah, and that funk, they call it umami when it's
so
Japanese,
good.
but that's
call
the
it
same
umami.
fermented
So
flavor,
good.
but same fermented
Yes.
that you have natto in Japan. In West
Exactly.
Africa, is netetu, it's the same
Exactly.
funk and really same flavor to it. But it's hard to just credit us. So
It is, and
yeah.
it goes into the slow cooking piece of it too. That takes time.
Yeah.
And who's willing to do that perhaps at home as opposed to, as you know, Man Must Walk, that's one of the best stores. area
You
to
know
go
this
to?
store, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
there we go.
Oh, yes.
And that's why
But
this
I
book
would-
is so important, because
I would also say that, because of mail order, we can get anything and get it to our homes. I mean, don't approach this book thinking you can't find ingredients and, oh, this different. How do I get them? Where do I get my marsala? You can get it. It's there. If you check your top markets and you don't find it there, just go online. I order stuff. I order my black rice, my red rice, my bamboo rice from all over the place. I mean, you'll be all right. Just get started. Make your list and get ready.
And it doesn't have to be a lengthy cuisine too. It's a myth. West African food in general, there's a process. There's food that's like slow food, as all traditional good cuisines are. But there's also ways to, as you can see a lot in this book, and she mentioned less than 20 minutes, even less than that you can do a great dish from Africa with the time that you have in San Francisco or New York City, or you're in a hurry to cook. So you can do that. You can have an African meal on Monday night after work or Tuesday night after work, and that's not a myth.
And one thing I'd like to add to that, this book actually doesn't have too many suggestions for substitutions. Where you see substitutions, where we absolutely, literally could not find it on the internet, that could be mailed to you, meaning, and one of those would be like a fish that's indigenous to the waters of Zambia. And there we give you an alternate fish that you can use. But spices, these ingredients, they are more accessible than ever. I think Africans have been doing the work because they want this food to taste the way that it has been made in their countries. And I think that has led to how this book can be used even more by everyone. And I think that legwork has driven us for this to be even possible. Here we are. So, but you have to plan for it, like Alexander said, and, say, if I'm gonna cook it in 2 weeks, let me order some things ahead of time.
That's it. Thank you so much for that question. I feel like there was another question back here we didn't want to miss. Was there? Did I see things? Tell me now. Oh, right here, yeah? Perfect, thank you.
Thank you so much. Y'all are all heroes to me in your own right. I'm 27 and coming up in a world where I've been able to witness conversations about African diasporic food being fine dining for most of my life. So I'm incredibly grateful to you all for the work you've done to make that possible. The question that I have is, I'm curious if you could talk about more of the conversations you had around aesthetics in the for the photos in the book. When we think about kind of what fine dining looks like so often, there are very kind of aesthetic ideas that we have in mind. So how do you kind of transmute or reject or embrace those when you are creating kind of this image of contemporary African kitchen, African cuisine? I think too, there's this idea that like African food is unsightly in the way that we traditionally have it. It doesn't have the same colors. It doesn't have the same just so many kind of elements of like European aesthetics in food. So I'm wondering if y'all could speak more to that.
Well, that's an interesting point because it wasn't that long ago that the same conversation was being had about African American food. We didn't even get to Africa. They weren't even a part of the conversation in this country. It was like African American food can't be fine dining food, which is why 35 years ago I opened a fine dining African American restaurant, translating the concept of soul food through the lens and disciplines of a French kitchen, and pairing it with wines and these kind of things. But more immediately to your point with regard to this book, we were talking to chefs in their own right, leading chefs who are cooking in major kitchens and contributing in a very significant way. So we weren't trying to tell them how to put food on a plate. We were essentially asking them to tell us. And the requirement, as Nina did a lot of the back and forth with all of the chefs, was that you take a photo of your dish so we can present that to the photographer to give her some sense of what this looks like for you. Because we wanted the chefs to be in control. We didn't want to create something and they didn't recognize their dish. And then the photographer, as brilliant as she is, translated what they had given her, into the context of a curated, individually yet similar palette photo expression. Because what's involved is also picking out the right plates and the this and the that. And I think we met the challenge. Again, having a top photographer who respected the product and brought that to life.
And just to add to that, the assignment was that this is for home cooks. And having renowned chefs, right, they have also been trained in that lens that fine dining looks a certain way too, right? So presenting some of their dishes, it may have looked like they used tweezers to put it together, which none of us are gonna pull out, hopefully. You might do that at home. When I only got 20 minutes, I don't have time for my tweezers. Thinking about what is a home cook able to achieve and be satisfied with, yet also impress, right? A home cook also wants to impress. And I think the visuals give you an idea of how to impress without being committed to an aesthetic that defines what we have traditionally seen as fine dining. That it's okay to have your food presented beautifully, but not in a way where you have to craft an artistic artwork on a plate. And I think the visuals that you see are able to translate that, but not say that just throw it on the plate anyhow, because our contributors do care. And they are presenting food that is beautiful, but to whose eye? And I think that's what issue, that we're around. Who's the judge of what's on the plate, and how do they see beauty in it? We see this as just as beautiful, and that is where they're fine with it, we're fine with it, and we believe that it's just as impressive as any tweezer can be, and that's fine too.
It's a different invitation.
I totally agree with you, and they are not my standards. I'm doing my food, and I definitely come from the place where, first of all, the cuisine that I'm getting inspiration for is beautiful. The traditional beautiful dish in a bowl that is served in Togo, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Senegal it's beautiful in its own way. It's not the dish that you would see maybe in a Michelin 3-star restaurant, because those Michelin 3-star restaurants have a journey that started in a certain region of the world, but that shouldn't dictate how we come with our own cuisine. I mean, food is such an important, it's so vital. It's like part of your culture, you know. So it's really, the more you connect with even your aesthetic and everything, it has to come with it. The vessel you use, the way you present it, you have to give a nod to that, where it came from. You have to present it this way. And I don't use tweezers, but my plates look as beautiful as I want them to look, like it's beautiful. And I believe people who get to see them also have the same opinion about it. And it's not disrespecting Pierre Gagnère, or that's his style, and that's my style. I respect his style, I respect my styles too, but we come from different cultures, and I totally think we should keep that in mind too. Even in the appellations, the words that we use to, you know, it's very important to like move away from that French. You know, there's like, you know, you have papillote, you know, okay, papillote. It's like when they wrap it around. But we have our tradition, we wrap it in banana leaves and stuff, and we call it le bouquet. You know, it's like, it's a beautiful, poetic sounding name. It's like, why should we try to, you know, call it French sounding? So that's really, that part is so important, you know, and food is such an important medium that could be also a way for us to reach that connection with the ancestors, but to get to a certain level of freedom by just claiming who we are, by just taking it. And we have a book like this as another step towards it, I believe.
Amen.
I
Amen.
believe so. Thank you so much for that. And the thing that I wanted to add to that is the way that you did choose to visually represent these dishes actually reminds me of the family style dish that I experienced when I was in West Africa. They might be individual serving looking as far as size, but for me it evokes, oh, that's the family circle, and the child was sitting there, mama there, dad, you know, and everybody's eating from this shared dish. That's what that also evokes to me, even though it is also a contemporary aesthetic. And I think that's so important, because an invitation for people to learn that kind of sharing, that kind of community is also inherent in this book. And so grateful for that. And before we end, there are two things I'd like to do. And Elizabeth shared that there is this graphic that we created for you all to interact with that basically manifests what you have in the book, which is the 5 regions of Africa and the countries within each of those regions. And this is how the book is organized, and we actually color-coded this to the colors in the book. We wanted to be right on the spot, you know? We gotta give respect. And so I want us all to look at this map for a few different reasons, some that won't be completely shared this evening, but I feel like once you keep it close at hand, I don't know, maybe it's traveling in the car with you, maybe it's in the laptop with you, keep this nearby for, you know, the next week, month, lifetime. And really be in the world of reorienting ourselves to the scope, the size, the depth of this continent. And as we are looking at this just simple representation of these exquisite expressions of our African story, our African origin story, looking at all these names and what they represent is such a powerful meditation on what's possible within this book as well. We are absolutely going to, in this moment, acknowledge that some of the names on this map are Congo, are Sudan. We can acknowledge the tragedy and the horror of what is happening in the world at the same time that we are embracing the opportunity to learn from and embrace the flavors and stories of those places that are experiencing so much heartache. I want to invite us to do that too, because that's the complexity of this moment. And that's the invitation that we're also able to give when we offer up this kind of experience of let's regain and reclaim every crevice, every angle, every circle, every possibility that's within the continent of Africa. And I love for that to be part of the call to action that goes along with this book that you take home with you. The other thing that I absolutely want to share in this moment is Sital. Could you come up, please? Sital is, yes, thank you so much. Sital, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. And Sital was able to be inspired from this book this evening to provide flavors of your home and beyond. So please tell us about yourself and what you are sharing with us downstairs tonight.
Lovely. Hi. How's it going? My name is Sital. I am also known as That Hausa Vegan. It's the way that I offer my own take on Northern Nigerian food as a vegan. So tonight, thank you so much for that book. I was really inspired, and it was beautiful to see some of the foods that I grew up eating in the book. So today there is a 3-course setting. The first course is tsire, which is a suya kebab. In the book, it was a chicken kebab, but as a vegan, I used oyster mushrooms, and I also used, absolutely, thank you. I used oyster mushrooms, and it's normally eaten with raw onions, but then I took inspiration from the book and pickled my onions with the hibiscus and clove, and I really loved how that kind of paired with that. So that is how you'll be eating it tonight. It's also served with tomatoes and jalapeno if you want to make it more spicy, but it is already spicy. The second course is a pumpkin peanut sweet potato stew that is served with a fermented rice cake. And I pretty much merged 2 dishes out of the book, and it reminded me of miritoshe that we eat growing up in Nigeria. The difference is I added the roasted sweet potatoes, and I also roasted my my peanuts while I was making the soup. And I also added sorrel leaves and spinach just to kind of mix up, period. And then the last course, which I was really excited about, was the Ghanaian chocolate pudding. And I did it exactly as the book the first time, and then I made some modifications to it by veganizing it and using coconut as the base, coconut and oat milk as the base. And I also in the book it said use prekese, and I kind of did half and half with prekese and cloves, and I really liked the spice that it added to it. And for the crumble, I used tiger nut chaff. After kind of getting the milk out, I used that, and I mixed it with gari, which is cassava, and then that was how I kind of replicated the maize crumble that was in there. And for the chantilly, I used the baobab, and I kind of kept it true to the book, except veganized, so it's with coconut whip. So, yeah.
And also the bisa.
Oh, yes, and then the bisa, which is, you want to talk a little bit more about it?
And simply just know that it's there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, it is there. And in northern Nigeria, we call it zobo. So I'm excited to try it. Lovely.
Thank you so much for sharing the menu with us. We are going to complete this portion of the evening here upstairs, and we want to invite you downstairs to have an autographed book, maybe even personalized by the authors. Pierre, I think there's some people that have your book and want you to sign it, so just so you know, you're on call. And we have those 3 flavors that we get to experience tonight from Sital that are down there as well. I am eternally grateful that you chose to be in our space with us this evening, telling your stories in such a bold way that we could hear it and embrace it and make sure that this doesn't stay in this room, that we shout out loud in our lives that this is a book that is a conduit to so much beauty, so much flavor, and so much healing, quite frankly, for a world that needs it so much. So thank you for being here. Okay, don't be shy. Everybody run downstairs.